Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Diverse Thinking Different Learning podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you are a parent trying to understand 504 plans, IEPs, how they differ, and what is best for your child, this episode is for you. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Marisol Chianello, Tiger Director at the Learning Rights Law Center. Marisol has dedicated her career to empowering families and advocating for equitable education. And today, she's going to help us separate fact from fiction and share practical advice to help you understand the IEP and 504 plan processes with confidence. Let's get started.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hi, Marisol. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Good morning, Dr. Wilson. Thank you for having me.
I so appreciate you being here. Heather Zaxton, who has been on the podcast before talking about school-based assessment, spoke very highly of you. And I am so glad that she connected us. So thank you again.
Thank you. And thank you to Heather.
Yes. And so, when I reached out to you, I was reaching out because so many parents have questions about IEPs and 504 plans, and they don't really understand the difference between the two, how it will help them. So I thought this would be a great conversation to go into the basics. I kind of think about this as an IEP 504, like 101. Like you think about a 101 class. You kind of want to understand in general what they are and how they can provide support to students with learning challenges. I understand that IEPs and 504 plans are both created to provide students with support, students with learning disabilities, but it seems like they function in different ways. Let's start with the basics in terms of what's an IEP, how does it differ from a 504 plan? How's that?
Okay, perfect. Thank you again for having me. I'll actually start, if it's okay, with a brief description of the 504 plan and the law that creates them or results in them. When we talk about 504, we're talking about plans related to the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, the 504. A Section 504 is what we call it. And at its core, Section 504 Rehabilitation Act is an anti-discrimination law. So what it says is, with respect to individuals with disabilities, we cannot discriminate against them or treat them differently from others. So in the school setting, what that means is that we have to make accommodations for children who have a disability. So for example, if we have an individual with a disability, such as a student who might be blind, we don't just not teach them because they're blind. That would be discrimination. We offer accommodations. We remove barriers, and we give them, for example, literature in Braille as opposed to regular print. If we have a child with a mobility issue, this has happened. We've had a client at Learning Rights who needs to go up to another level in order to reach her classroom upstairs, but is not able to do that because of her disability. We don't just not teach her, we accommodate her by offering her an alternative way of going upstairs, possibly an elevator. So it's really about removing barriers that children have resulting from their disability to make sure that they are on an equal playing field as their typical peers. So we're ensuring that we don't discriminate or treat them any differently because of their disability. So 504, I see it as really removing barriers. IEPs are specifically intended to offer funding, special education services, and supports to kids with disabilities. So we're offering speech and language. We're offering particular goals. We're offering specially designated instruction. So we're really helping them to not just get into the classroom, but actually once they're there, if they need added help, that's what IEP services are for. So for example, let's take the student who needed to get to her classroom on the second floor using the elevator. We accommodated that. And if she's able to then, learn as her typical peers do, then we're good. She's set. She has equal access. But for example, if she has a learning disability or a speech impairment, dyslexia, for example, we then have to offer special education services so that she can make progress similar to her peers.
Got it. That's so clear. And I think there's often so many misunderstandings about the IEP, the 504 plan. Many parents have been told that if their child, for example, has an anxiety disorder or ADHD, they should get a 504 plan. And if their child has a learning disorder like dyslexia, they should request an IEP. Are there common challenges or diagnoses that typically align with each type of plan? It sounds like it really differs in terms of the child's challenges.
It really does depend on what the challenges are for the child. One of the differences, a main difference, is with 504. Those will apply to students with a disability or with a condition that impacts any major life activity. So that can be, for example, reading. That can be concentration. That can be breathing for a student who has asthma. That could be regulation for a student who has difficulty using the restroom. So we're really not just talking about school. We're talking about any major life activity that's impacted by the disability. With IEP, we're especially or specifically looking for an impact on the student's performance. There must be an adverse impact on this child's performance. So in addition to just having a disability, there must be shown some impact on the child's ability to make progress in light of their circumstances. And back to the disability, as I mentioned, 504, it includes impact on any major life activity. So there are no categories. If it's a major life activity, then we can consider a 504. IEP is different in that there are 13 qualifying disabilities that will allow a child to receive services. Sometimes they overlap. For example, sometimes a student with asthma may qualify for a 504 and also IEP. So they're not mutually exclusive. There might be some overlap in the diagnoses. But IEP, we're looking at one of 13 categories. And in addition to eligibility under one of those categories, we must also find an adverse impact on educational progress.
Okay. And it seems like that is a really significant differentiator, that significant impact. And it has to be shown, which usually requires some form of an assessment to make that determination. And I think sometimes when parents reach out to me, they wonder, is it up to me as a parent to determine if my child qualifies for an IEP or a 504 plan? And if so, how do they make that determination when they don't fully understand both of these?
Yeah. My suggestion under those circumstances would be if you're not expected to know what the right answer is. What you're expected to know is your child. And you know your child best. You know your child better than anyone else. And if you have concerns, you yourself are not responsible for putting a label on that or, determining the eligibility of category or any of these complicated things. You are responsible for communicating your concerns to the school, and then they are supposed to work with you to figure out next steps. If a parent is trying to determine between IEP and 504, I don't see any challenges that come with requesting an IEP. An IEP definitely has many, many more protections than a 504 does. An IEP is meant to protect parents and make sure that they have meaningful participation in their child's education. So the IEP will come with what we call procedural safeguards or parents' rights and students' rights that are much more formalized than a 504. So you're going to get a lot more protection with an IEP versus a 504 plan.
Okay. I think that's really important for parents to know. And so when a parent sees their child struggling, or maybe they just received a diagnosis from a pediatrician or from a private speech and language pathologist, and they are seeking support for their child at school. Do they go in saying, I want to request an IEP, or I want to request an IEP or a 504 plan because they don't know what their child needs? Where do they start?
I think a good starting point is to go ahead and request an IEP, make a request for IEP. And you always want to make that request in writing. At Learning Rights and the Tiger program that I direct, we have sample letters that we can provide individuals who might be interested. It's a pretty simple, uh, you know, paper to put forward. It's just your student's name, what your concerns are, and that you want an IEP assessment. And then we have on our template different sections that you can check off to say maybe you have concerns with autism or speech and language or motor abilities. You can specify exactly what your concerns are in order to alert the school to those concerns. So I would recommend putting a request in writing to the school for an IEP and then waiting for their response. Once you do submit a request for IEP, they have 15 days to respond to you with an assessment plan. So be on the lookout for that assessment plan. Once you submit your request, check the calendar for 15 calendar days. Once they get you an assessment plan, my recommendation is that you look at it very carefully to make sure it covers all the areas of all the areas that you're concerned about. So if they're going to assess, for example, psycho ed and autism, but not speech and language, and you have a concern about speech and language, you can go ahead and add that in. Assessment is supposed to be comprehensive and assess in all areas of suspected disabilities. So you want to make sure that that's on the assessment plan. Once you get the assessment plan, don't hold on for it too long. Go ahead and review it, but get it in, because that triggers an important deadline. Once you get the assessment plan in with your signature, then the school can begin to assess your child, and they have 60 days to complete the assessments and hold an IEP meeting with you. So that's definitely the first step, is to put it in writing, get it into the school. If you don't know exactly who to get it to, I would recommend going to the front office. Once you've given it to, personnel there, they're responsible for making sure it gets in the right hands and the IEP process can begin.
Wonderful. And I think that process that you've described is going to help so many parents, because oftentimes when they don't know where to start, they don't know the different steps that you've just described so beautifully, and then also what to expect. So it sounds like after this is in 60 days, then there's some form of an assessment or an evaluation, depending on the concerns that were outlined by the parent when they made the request.
That's correct. And maybe more concerns will arise during the course of the assessment. Maybe something that hadn't been on the parents' radar before will arise that the psychologist might catch, and then that gets assessed too. But one thing I do want to let parents know is that, they have this very important right to request assessments. It's not their burden or responsibility only. What I'm trying to say is that school districts have an affirmative obligation to seek and find students in the district who are suspected of having a disability, and they're required to assess them. So schools have that obligation to go out and find students. Yes, parents have a very important right and ability to be able to request assessments, but the schools also should be finding students who are suspected of having a disability and assessing them. And that's what we call child find.
And that's important to know too, because sometimes it may not be even on the parent's radar that their child is struggling. And so it may be that the parents aren't the one requesting the IEP, but the teachers or educators are coming to them and saying, we're noticing some struggles with your child. This is what we are recommending, so we can better understand how to support them.
Absolutely. Yes.
Now, our IEPs, and it sounds like you've kind of addressed this in the beginning, but I really want to be clear for listeners, because I think oftentimes people believe that IEPs and 504 plans are only for students with academic challenges. Can they also address social and behavioral challenges?
Absolutely. So the point of an IEP, for example, is to provide a free and appropriate public education, what we call FAPE. And education is not just limited to reading, math, and spelling, for example. Education is everything that includes everything that is preparing a child, that allows a child to perform and function in school. So, for example, we've talked about speech and language. We've talked about motor skills, socialization, for example, pragmatic language, the ability to understand and communicate using social skills. All of these things are aspects of a child's education that are not just the standard reading, writing, and spelling, for example. So yes, absolutely, any area that's impacted, that impacts a child's education or ability to function in the educational setting can be addressed in the IEP as well as 504. We want to make sure that kids aren't just learning the curriculum, but that they're able to get along with their peers at recess and PE, that they're able to participate in assemblies. So yes, to the maximum extent possible, we're addressing all these areas that are impacted by the disability. It is not just the standard curriculum.
And the reason why I asked that question, because oftentimes parents hear it really is only going to be helpful if your child is having difficulty accessing the curriculum. I've heard that phrase, but it sounds like if your child is having difficulty socially, interacting with other students in groups, and having behavioral challenges that get in the way, that can warrant a plan as well.
Absolutely. If it's something that's inhibiting that child's ability to make progress, and if the child is, for example, having outbursts or eloping, running out of the classroom, they're not learning. That's definitely impacting the education, right? And if they're not able to play with their peers, if they're not able to socialize, that impacts their ability to be in the school setting. So if there's any kind of impact, it doesn't just have to be academics. And oftentimes it's not, it's these other things, these other abilities to function in the school setting that require an IEP or 504.
Okay. And one of the things you mentioned is that the IEP can have more safeguards for families than a 504 plan. And I've had many parents say that they have heard that a 504 plan is just a lighter version of an IEP. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the additional safeguards that are in place with an IEP versus a 504 plan.
Okay, perfect. So for an IEP and 504, in order for a child to be assessed, the parent must give consent. But after that, the parents' rights are much more limited under a 504, or much more protected under IEP and IDEA. So an IEP comes with, as I said before, procedural safeguards. So once an IEP assessment is completed, the school can't actually do anything, provide services, unless you, the parent, consent. So you have the right to consent. And without your consent, things cannot get started. You have a right to what we call meaningful participation. So, for example, individuals or parents who might be Spanish speaking or Korean speaking or Mandarin speaking, they have a right to participate meaningfully, meaning they have a right to have information provided to them in their native language. We also have, for example, a right to records, to request records with the IEP. So parents, if they want to be able to review their child's records, they put a letter in writing to the school. And in California, the school has 5 days to get them those records. Parents have a right. There's lots of rights under the IEP. For example, another one, the right to request assessments. So let's say your child has been assessed and you're noticing something else come up. You, again, don't have to wait for the district. You can initiate a request to have your child assessed. And then an important added feature of that is that you can request an independent assessment. So, for example, if the school assesses your child and you don't agree with the assessment, you can request that they publicly fund a private assessment by an independent evaluator. And then these are all very important pieces of IEP and protections that are offered to parents. And one very, very strong protection that applies is what we call stay put. So if your child has an IEP, and let's say your child has an IEP, they're in first grade, now we're going into second grade, and the school wants to remove services. Your child, for example, is receiving speech and language services, and the school no longer wants to provide those. You can disagree with the removal, and while that dispute is being resolved, speech and language services, quote unquote, stay put. The school has to continue providing the services that are in the prior IEP until the dispute is resolved. So that's a very, very powerful tool that parents that come along with IEPs.
Okay. And I think a lot of that information parents are not aware of. They're not aware of, again, that distinction with 504 and IEPs, but also the extent to which they are involved and the things that they have the right to request, which I think is so important because so many parents don't even know the first step, which is requesting an IEP, how to go about that. But then once you get one, what are the other things that you can request? What are you entitled to? How can you further ensure that your child is getting the support that they need?
And I think, Dr. Wilson, you make a great point. So at Learning Rights, what I do is I teach the Know Your Rights classes, and I totally appreciate where you're coming from or what you're stating that parents don't know. And it's not their fault. You just, an important piece of this whole process is that they are equal team members with regard to the IEP. So if they've got an IEP, I know it can be intimidating. You go to a meeting and you, the parent, are there, and then you're looking at all these people from the school district, the principal, maybe the teachers, the general ed, the special ed, resource specialists. There's all these people, psychologists. It can be very intimidating. But parents must remember they know their child best and they are an equal team member. I think a lot of times parents feel pressure to defer to what the school is offering or feel pressure to agree, but they don't have to. If they disagree, they can ask questions and they can speak up, and they should. That's their role as part of the IEP team.
And I think that's what is a little intimidating about the process. And I've been in some of those meetings where sometimes you have a sole parent on one end of the table, and then you have a whole team of educators and support specialists on the other side. And the parent can feel very isolated and alone and feel like they are not familiar with a lot of the language that is used in these meetings. Are there things that parents can do to prepare for the initial meeting and subsequent meetings?
Sure. Well, I definitely recommend, given the right to request records, that before you go into an IEP meeting, that parents request any assessments that are going to be discussed. Again, it's all so intimidating. You walk into an IEP meeting, you're given an assessment, and you don't know. It's so hard to understand what they're saying. In fact, we have classes that are just tailored to teaching parents to understand assessments because they're complicated. Even I've been a lawyer for almost 20 years, and I sometimes get an assessments and I'm like, what is this saying? So it can be very intimidating, but go ahead and request records. Look at the assessment ahead of time so you have some understanding of what is being recommended, or some understanding of the impact that your child is experiencing. When you go to the IEP, have questions ready. If there are things in the assessments that you don't understand, don't be embarrassed to ask. It's their responsibility and obligation to explain to you what's in the assessment. Because again, you have the right to meaningful participation. If you don't understand what's going on, you're not able to meaningfully participate. So you need to be able to understand what's going on. You can take someone with you to the IEP meeting, maybe a friend or somebody who helps you feel grounded. When you're at the IEP meeting, though, remember you are the parent, you are the advocate for your child. So you should be the one that's really speaking up and asking questions. If you need to take a break, take a break. if maybe your friend is there to give you a cue, like, okay, you're getting emotional, it's time to take a break. Or maybe your friend is there taking notes for you. They're there to help, but you are the parent. Let them support you in your role. So that's, you know, just having assessments, thinking ahead of time what your questions are, having support if you need it. I think also focusing or being able to articulate your child's strengths is a good approach as well. I have parents tell me all the time that the school is just talking about my child's weaknesses and their deficits and their needs. But oftentimes discussing the strengths can go a long way to helping the student make progress. So making sure that those get into the IEP and that those get addressed can be important for the student and their ability to make progress.
Yes. And I love that you mentioned the strengths, because when I'm writing reports, that's such an important piece. And even though that's not the reason why people are seeking the evaluation, they want to be able to identify what the struggles are and why the child is struggling. But the supports are so important to better understanding the child and all of their talents, all of the gifts that they bring to the table, but also mechanisms for compensating for areas of difficulty as well.
Right. I mean, imagine being the child in a school setting where your IEP is focused on only your deficits, or just, that's all you're working on. Every day you're working on how to make speech and language better. Every day you're working on meeting your math goals. And it becomes a lot and difficult for the child to maintain. So we have to make sure that the focus is not just deficits and needs, but that we play on the child's strengths in order to help out in other areas. And again, every child is different, but definitely go in there with knowledge and ability to articulate your child's strengths. One of the things that we do recommend as well is if before going into an IEP meeting, that you not only request the records, but that you have them assembled, maybe in a binder or organized in some way that you can understand. It's amazing how impactful and empowering it can be for a parent to go into an IEP meeting feeling like they have information at their disposal and that they've organized it. So they know where to find things. If the new IEP that's being proposed has the same goals as last year's, the parent can easily find that last IEP and say, no, these are the same goals. Let's talk about something else. So it's very empowering to have that information ahead of time and have it organized in the way that you understand. We also like to encourage parents to create what we call a student profile. So when you go into the IEP meeting, people are talking numbers, data, and dry information, and sometimes it gets lost that we're talking about a child. So if a parent can create a profile, we have samples, maybe a picture of the child, what they like, how they learn best, maybe areas that they need help learning, to remind the IEP meeting that this is a child and we need to have some empathy and some consideration for the fact that it's a little human being, not just, a number or data point. And also, I think what parents should try to understand, and this is what we try to do at Tiger, is to realize that they're not alone. It can be very intimidating. And so at my work, what we do is the know your rights, but knowing your rights is just one piece of it. Feeling part of a community and realizing that you're not alone, you're not the only one, is so empowering. So yes, you know your rights, and we can teach you all of that, but more than anything, Tiger is not just the curriculum; it's the community. It's just talking with other parents and realizing that they're in similar situations, they've had similar situations, and just realizing that as a parent, you're not alone, and it's not just you, and it's not the district is. It's not you versus the school district, or at least it's not supposed to.
Right. And I think I know that's one of the things I love about the Learning Rights Law Center and the Tiger program specifically, is that you really help families navigate this process, navigate the challenges, the hurdles that they might face, help them to better understand, and you walk alongside them as they're going through this journey. One of the questions that comes up, and we've been talking about assessments and how they're so important to determine whether or not a child will get an IEP, a 504 plan, and services at school. And this came up when I was interviewing Dr. Vindia Fernandez to talk about bilingual children. Do parents have the right to ask for their child to be assessed in the second language? And not only for bilingual children, but for children attending for a dual immersion, like a language immersion program where all of their instruction has been, for example, in Spanish, and they're struggling with learning.
So please feel free to chime in if you have different thoughts. But my understanding is that the assessment needs to be in the child's primary language. So if they're learning, whatever instruction is being taught in class, the idea really is to figure out what's that child's first language. Maybe it is what's being taught in class. Maybe it's what's being taught in the home. Maybe it's not. And it's really the assessor's responsibility to make that determination. And then go ahead and provide the assessment in the child's primary language.
Yes. And that's my understanding as well. And I think that the sticking point will be, how do you determine,
Right.
It seems like you'd have to have a bilingual assessor to make that determination in the first place, in which is the dominant language for a child.
Right. You need a person who has the ability to make that determination. And I would argue if they don't have that ability, that language capacity, then they're not appropriate for the assessment, especially when that's, at the root of the assessment, or at the heart of the assessment. What's the primary language of the student?
Right. So I'm thinking now of parents who are just starting this journey, Marisol. They might be seeing their kids struggle in school. Is there a piece of advice you'd give to those parents who say, my child is struggling, the teacher's not seeing it, I'm seeing it, or maybe they haven't even had that discussion with the teacher yet, but they're seeing the struggles at home, maybe meltdowns when they're asked to read, they don't like to read, they're noticing that they're reading more slowly, or they can't focus when they're engaging in their homework activities or schoolwork. Is there any piece of advice that you give to parents who are seeing their kids struggle?
I think don't be afraid to try to help your child. Don't be afraid to start the process. I know for a lot of parents, there's a fear of having your child labeled. There's a fear of stigma that might come with having your child eligible for special education services. And people will deal with that in their own way. But if a child is struggling and needs help, they deserve the help. And it's to their benefit and to your benefit as a parent to get them the help that's required. So even if you're just starting the process and inquiring, is this a possibility? Does my child possibly need the help? Don't let fear or stigma stop you from getting the help that your child needs. Kids who are struggling in school, not able to make progress, are trying their very best. And sometimes they just need that extra little help. And that extra little push can go a long way to their performance, to their self-esteem, to their relationships with their peers. So don't be afraid to start the process. Again, just that letter that you turn into the school and then see where it goes. I think a lot of times, maybe not just stigma, but parents just kind of want to take a wait and see approach. Start the process.
Yes.
Start the process and wait and see where that takes you. Because if you can get your child the help, the sooner the better. The sooner the child gets the help, the better it's going to be for them.
Absolutely. And we know that when kids get intervention early for their struggles, the outcomes are so much better. And that is exactly what you're speaking to. Before we end this discussion, which has been so informative, and I know it's going to help so many parents, can you talk a little bit about the programs, the support that Learning Rights Law Center provides? Because you've mentioned a couple things, the Know Your Rights classes, and that I think will help so many parents listening may not have been aware of them. Can you talk a little bit about the services and the support that you provide?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for allowing me to do that. So I run the Tiger program, which is a Know Your Rights program, classes for parents who have children in special education. And we talk over the course of 9 months of some of the things that we've been talking about here, only in more detail. And the purpose of the program is really to empower parents, not only to give them knowledge of their rights, but to give them that sense of community and that sense of, I'm not alone. Others are doing this. I can do it too. There's a lot of strength that comes with that. So over the course of 9 months, we are in person as well as virtual, and we talk about all of these things that you and I have been discussing. At the end of that, there's a graduation, a final project, and a graduation. The final project we call the Tiger Treasure. So anything that the parent has learned over the course of 9 months that they want to take with them and remember. It's a relatively new piece of the program. We've had parents write songs with lyrics that remind them to always put things in writing because they didn't think about that before. But after Tiger, they know always put things in writing. We have had parents do poems and we had a parent actually create a literal treasure chest with mementos of things that she learned through the Tiger program. So really, we're empowering parents to be able to help themselves. Similarly, we have our education rights clinic where, going back to our discussion, if a parent wants to know how to start the process, make an appointment with our education rights clinic. They can talk to you one-on-one, give you a free legal consultation, and give you advice regarding next steps. If you need help drafting that letter to the school, they can help you with that. If you need help requesting assessments, they can help you with that. And again, all of this is intended to help the parent help themselves. We really are focused on self-empowerment with respect to the parents. But we know that that's not always an option. And we know that sometimes parents are going to meet challenges where more help is needed. And that's where we have our litigation program, where we have attorneys who can step in to act on the parent's behalf and on behalf of the child.
So many great services there. And you are empowering parents. And like you said, you're helping them help themselves. And you're also helping them to be better advocates for their children, which is so important. And it's so important for parents to have accurate information and to feel confident in advocating for their children's needs. And that's what you provide them. It's such a gift. If listeners want to learn more about Learning Rights Law Center, how to access some of the services you've described, how can they get more information?
Sure. So they can always go to our website, www.learningrights.org. And on there, you will find our different programs. So if you click on Tiger program, you'll find information on Tiger and how to reach us. If you want to request a free legal consultation, there's a form that you can click on. You can do it online. It's really easy and they'll get back to you quickly. So all the information is at our website, learningrights.org. And if there are particular questions regarding the Tiger program, our Know Your Rights program, I encourage folks to reach out to tiger@learningrights.org, and we're happy to set up a Zoom meeting, set up a phone call, and talk about how we might be able to be of assistance.
Amazing resource. Thank you, Marisol, for joining us today. You've been incredibly helpful. It's been so informative, and I can't thank you enough for being here and for all of the work that you're doing to support families. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Be sure to check out the show notes. There you will find information about how to initiate an assessment. You will find information about the Tiger program and Education Rights Clinic at the Learning Rights Law Center, and even information about how to navigate parent-teacher conferences. So be sure to check them out. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.